I think Intel might kill DLSS in a way that FSR, at least 1.0, isn't gonna do. But why? And what is it? Okay, well, this all came out yesterday, and there's other channels who went into more of the technical details that came from Intel's big announcements yesterday that involved the Intel XeSS, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, although they also talked about some processor stuff and all that. I really enjoyed the hardware unboxed video on this topic if you want more of the technical details. What I'm going to get into is more of an opinion piece, prediction piece on what do I think about XeSS and why I think this could be a major disruption to the GPU space and these types of technologies, as well as the only way that Intel actually had any chance at making their GPUs marketable. Although, I mean, price and supply right now is going to be a big deal too. So what is this thing? XeSS, or can we call it XeSS? If they're going to call it XeSS, can we please just call it XeSS? I think that would be much better. Or, you know, since they branded it ARC, if we're branding all these things ARC, can we call it ARCs? With two S's? I don't know. Anyway, whatever. The point is, this is looking like more of a direct competitor to DLSS than AMD's FSR is, at least in version 1.0. And why is that? Well, because Intel's new technology does what DLSS does. It uses a machine learning trained deep learning algorithm to reconstruct an image at a higher resolution rather than just doing some upscaling and sharpening pass that honestly FSR does really nicely at higher resolutions, but at lower resolutions it just doesn't really get the job done the same way that DLSS does. So in my opinion of, you know, what's better, DLSS or FSR, I think at high resolutions and the higher quality presets, like if you're looking at 4K doing DLSS quality versus FSR ultra quality, I think in some ways FSR might even have the advantage because it doesn't introduce some of the artifacts and ghosting that DLSS can do. But at the lower resolutions, FSR can really kind of fall apart because it doesn't have as much data to work with. DLSS, and it looks like Intel's XeSS, I want to just call it XS, whatever, XS frames, guys. Anyway, looks like it's going to actually do what DLSS does. It uses temporal data. It uses a machine learning, deep learning trained algorithm. It takes all that information from those extra frames and the temporal data to really reconstruct a 4K image. It can add detail back in there that wasn't there in the actual rendered image in the rendered resolution like DLSS does. And when DLSS works properly, it's like black magic. You're getting free performance, although like I said, it does introduce image artifacts and people who claim that it actually improves the image. That's in like certain specific details, but overall, in my opinion, there's usually enough artifacts and ghosting added in that I'd rather just play the game in native if possible. But anyway, it's looking like from what Intel has shown that they're trying to target DLSS absolutely head on. Now they've given us some footage and the quality here it doesn't tell us everything. For one thing, this pans really slowly, but it does look fairly impressive. And where DLSS often breaks down is in motion compared to still images. And I'd really be interested in seeing a higher motion chart or video or whatever side-by-side thing for this Intel technology. But this technology is still a long ways off. But anyway, if it's actually able to deliver something like DLSS quality, especially rendering up from those lower resolutions where FSR has some trouble, I think that this could be a huge deal. And the big reason why, and the reason why I think Intel isn't going to just have a huge flop here, is that it's going to work on all GPUs. And you might be like, well, FSR works on all GPUs. Yeah, but like I said, FSR, at least in its current version, doesn't have that same low resolution to high resolution upscaling, or even if you're at like 1080p and trying to use it, it just doesn't look nearly as good as DLSS does. Guys, that's just the truth. I think it's great at the upper resolutions. I've already said this, but at the lower resolutions, it just doesn't compete. But Intel's technology might. Not only that, I just saw an article about how Intel has hired one of the original architects of DLSS. They used to work for NVIDIA developing that technology. So I think they're not only developing a very similar technology right now, I think they're doubling down on improving that and making sure it is a real competitor to DLSS. This is a big deal. Intel is a big company with a lot of money, and it looks like they are taking the GPU market here very seriously. And they're very smart to have this tech available because they have 0% market share, at least in the discrete, do-it-yourself, build-your-own marketplace. Obviously, they have their integrated chips, but they really need a way to break in here. And if they did something like NVIDIA does by saying, this is our technology that only works on our GPUs, and you need to integrate it into your engine, and blah, 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 and people are like, you want us to integrate this into our engine? When you have 0% market share, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Well, by making this run on all GPUs, now it's like Intel's coming in with, hey, you know that really cool DLSS thing? Well, we have the same thing basically, but it's not gonna only be limited to NVIDIA GPUs, AMD can do it too, and hey, it'll work on our Intel chips too. Now, here's Intel's cool little thing they've got, which is that it will work a little bit better on their GPUs than it will on the competition because of their own little, they're not called tensor cores, but it's the same idea as how NVIDIA has their little cores that are accelerating DLSS. They have their cores that are going to accelerate their XeSS. But it looks like, according to their, okay, I'm a math teacher, guys. If somebody gives me a graph that doesn't have any scale on it, I'm going to be mad at them, and this graph is not getting an A. But if we assume that this is just trying to show us the relative performance on some sort of standard scale, it looks like it's not going to be a huge performance hit to run it without that acceleration, which, as a side note here, makes me wonder if NVIDIA could have been doing that all along with DLSS. For example, if you have a 1080 Ti, could it actually run DLSS if NVIDIA let it? Just let it run on the normal shader cores instead of the tensor cores, and it probably wouldn't give you the same amount of boost that DLSS does, but could still give you something. Makes you wonder if Intel's got a very similar tech that apparently can do that, right? And maybe NVIDIA, I don't think they would bother, especially as the non-RTX cards get older and older, but could NVIDIA open that up a little bit in the future? Who knows? But I'm just really glad to see this pressure there. So do I think that this could actually kill off DLSS? I don't think NVIDIA is going to want to let DLSS go, and they're still willing to pay money to have their engineers come out and help companies and game developers put DLSS into their products. So I don't think DLSS will disappear, but I do think that XeSS has a very good chance at becoming kind of the de facto game setting that most, if not all, games could use in the future, even if Intel's GPUs don't capture a huge market share. Because if it can basically deliver what DLSS does, but it runs on all GPUs, fantastic. Why would we not just use that one? And in some ways, that's more like, I think, the FreeSync G-Sync argument, where it's like, okay, G-Sync has a few tiny little advantages with the actual module, but if we could do this way cheaper and easier and it works for everybody with FreeSync, maybe we should just do FreeSync, right? And FSR, people were saying that that's the argument for FSR. I feel like FSR, at least in its 1.0 version, at the lower resolutions doesn't deliver that, but it's looking like Intel might. And again, that's a might. We've got a ways to wait. I'm also excited for them claiming, at least, that this could eventually go open source, which would be awesome. AMD delivered on their open source promise for FSR. It'd be really cool if we started seeing one of these more deep learning options deliver. And if Intel, to be clear, if Intel hadn't done this, I think that their chips would have been absolutely dead on arrival unless they just managed to ship with huge supply and at low prices while the market still is the way it is, which I think they'll still need to do, because Intel has the advantage of being a trusted name brand, but just not in the GPU space. So there's lots of ways that their launch could still fail. But if you had to convince somebody, like, why am I not just buying a 3070 if we're correct that Intel's highest end chip is going to be something like a 3070 in performance, which are the rumors, it's just a rumor, we don't know until it comes out. But like, why not just buy a 3070? Well, especially if Intel didn't have something like DLSS to compete, it'd be a hard sell. I've got to say, I just bought an AMD 6800 XT to drive this new 4K OLED, review upcoming, right? Keep saying that, I promise the review will come out. Although, speaking of being a math teacher, but school year's about to start up next week, so videos on my channel might slow down, might not get one out every day these days. But anyway, when I bought that 6800 XT, I've got to be honest, giving up that DLSS option, especially when you're trying to drive something like 4K, is a bit of a tough sell. If it hadn't been hundreds of dollars cheaper than the 3080s I could find, that was a tough sell. But I'm excited because if XeSS comes out in future titles and actually works basically like DLSS and would run on my AMD card, that is fantastic. And this is going to be fantastic for games in general. So yeah, it might end up being a kind of a failed tech, or maybe the 1.0 version is as bad like DLSS 1.0 was. But again, making moves like hiring one of the DLSS engineers, that tells me that Intel's taking this seriously, and they are a company that is big enough and well-funded enough that if they want to, they can send those teams of helpers out to the game developers, the game engine studios. They can get things going on this. They have the funding. It's looking like they're taking this seriously, and I am just so excited to get this third competitor in the GPU space, because we could really use something to shake things up. Even if they don't compete at the high end right at first, if they're able to get in some solid performance cards, 3070 and lower, fine. That's great for anybody doing 1080p, 1440p. Fantastic. Deliver it with supply and at a good price with good technology and good drivers. Cross your fingers for good drivers, guys. Anyway, I'm excited. I'll quit rambling. I hope all of you have an excellent day.